I am an internet dating hipster. I loved it before it was cool. In the mid-90s, my dad brought home a clunky desktop computer and modem, and I was in dial-up heaven. This was before AOL CDs lived at every point-of-sale counter, before Match.com was a household name, before Friendster. The computer was set up in our basement, and I would log on after the rest of my family went to sleep, staying up all night chatting with strangers when all it took to make a love connection was to ask ASL. I didn't do more than chat for those first few years. I didn't have the courage to meet anyone until name brand dating sites emerged in earnest in the early 2000s. But those early years in my parents' basement set the stage for me to dive in head first in my mid-20s using sites like Lavalife, FriendFinder, JDate, and Nerve.com. I relished the opportunity to connect with people online. I was terrified of flirting in person, but had a knack for displaying my tremendous wit through well-crafted profiles and snarky yet saucy messages. My first few internet dates were spectacular failures, best categorized as mutual catfishing. Uncomfortable with my weight, I only uploaded headshots, or the kind of photos that later became known as MySpace angles. And I quickly learned that some men were brazen about padding their height by several extra inches or using photos taken more than a decade prior. But hope sprang eternal, and I had an endless stream of potential soulmates. With time, my skills improved. I became more transparent in how I marketed myself and got better at spotting red flags. My dance card filled up and my horizons broadened. And I kept my friends entertained with an endless supply of stories. There was the guy who made 2 20-minute trips to the bathroom during a coffee date without explanation, but who really wanted to see me again and cried when I said no. There was the guy who took me to a fancy restaurant on our first date and then revealed he was buying dinner on his corporate Amex card. That same guy offered to take me traveling around the world, excluding the Middle East and Europe, because he didn't want my Jewishness to cramp his style in anti-Semitic countries. There were the 2 dreamy geologists who I met on separate websites at around the same time, who turned out to not just be coworkers, but to share a desk and strongly dislike each other. And there were the expected fumbling sexual proposals, casual hookups, and awkward conversations. I went on tons of first dates, a decent number of second and third dates, and even had some relationships that lasted for months at a time. Despite some frustrations and disappointments, I loved it. I became a true believer. And then I met my future husband, fell happily into monogamy, and shut down all my profiles. 5 years later, when my marriage was ending, I turned back to online dating. My ex and I mutually agreed it was fine to start seeing other people while we were separating, and I needed to have some fun. This time around, I focused on using OkCupid. The matching algorithm appealed to my nerdy sensibilities and quickly spoon-fed me an endless stream of smart, socially progressive, perverted weirdos. I was in heaven. My return to the dating world became a part-time job. I was so busy, I started a spreadsheet. The social butterfly in me found it helpful to view my color-coded prospects at a glance. The social scientist in me was interested in the relationship between demographics, match percent, and outcomes. Trends emerged almost immediately. A high match percent, anything in the 90s, reliably indicated I'd found someone with similar interests, values, and outlook on life. It didn't predict attraction or chemistry, but it was a reasonable starting place. A low match percent, anything under the 80s indicated there would be trouble in paradise. The site even gives a little pop-up for low match scores warning, "Y'all got issues." Despite our 56% match score, I decided to respond to Jake's email when it landed in my inbox. I didn't have high hopes, but he was cute, a guitar player and a surfer, and I was new to being single in Southern California. This was a quintessential San Diego dating experience I did not want to deny myself. Our email conversation was stilted, but he really wanted to meet up. I agreed to dinner and then asked him for his full name and phone number, joking that it would be how the police tracked him down after they found my body. This was deeply personally offensive to Jake, so I apologized profusely and moved on, deliberately ignoring the slowly growing pile of red flags. On the night of our date, I drove to Old Town, parked in one of the well-lit municipal parking lots, and walked a couple blocks to Harney Sushi. Upon meeting Jake in person, I was relieved he looked exactly like his pictures, but also knew that, for no particular reason, he just didn't do it for me. Dinner was off to a rough start when he ordered a drink and insisted I do the same. I don't drink. Did you not see that in my profile? Oh, yeah, I don't drink either, but I'm gonna have this one beer right now. I ordered a club soda. We started to talk about work the way reasonable grown-ups in their 30s often do. He told me about his job as an IT project manager and how he'd recently been fired because his asshole manager was out to get him. It turned out it wasn't the first time he'd been fired. Jake had a long history of people doing him wrong, not appreciating his talents, and inviting him to look for employment elsewhere. Those employers were assholes, though. His music career was on the verge of taking off, and they'd all regret it soon enough. I checked out fully around the time he started explaining his personal spirituality, a loose tapestry of 6 or 7 Eastern religions layered on top of the gods of the ocean and copious amounts of marijuana. This belief system influenced his music, his surfing, and his certainty that all his previous employers were out to destroy him. Before our waitress brought us the dessert menu, Jake asked if I would go on a second date with him. I said yes. It was easier than saying no and risking conflict with a stranger in public. He seemed happy. We finished the meal, split the check, and left the restaurant. Jake insisted on walking me to my car, so we made our way back to that well-lit municipal parking lot in the middle of Old Town. It was around 9 p.m. on a weeknight, and while it wasn't super crowded, there were still cars and people around. As soon as we got to my car, Jake started kissing me. I didn't resist. It was easier than saying no and risking conflict with a stranger in public. While he was jamming his tongue in my mouth, his hands moved down to my waist and then to the back pockets of my jeans. As I contemplated how inappropriate this scene was for the setting, he slid the back of my shirt up slightly and then moved his hands down, inside the back of my pants. I thought he was really into grabbing my butt. I was wrong. In one swift motion, I felt a finger plunge down the crack of my ass, and it was not stopping. I don't know how many seconds it took for me to realize what was happening, but I pulled back before he managed to insert his finger all the way. I pushed him off of me with a forceful no. Jake took my resistance as a sign to stop with the ass play and go back to making out with me. I pushed him off again, told him I had to work early the next day, got in my car, and sped home to take a shower. The violation left me feeling gross about myself rather than angry at him, and I wanted to wash away all traces of the evening. The next day, Jake texted me to say he'd had a great time and to find out when I could get together for our second date. I sent a brief reply that while it had been nice to meet him, I didn't feel a strong enough connection to warrant a second date. The text messages and voicemails flooded in. Kim, you have to call me. You agreed to a second date. You're wrong. We do have chemistry. "You fucking bitch, why won't you talk to me?" Over the next 48 hours, I received 15 text messages and 7 voicemails from Jake. I didn't reply. I awkwardly explained to my roommate what was going on. I was pretty sure I hadn't told Jake my last name or any identifying information, but I was still concerned he'd show up on our doorstep demanding answers. A few more days went by, and I maintained radio silence. Eventually, the texts and the calls stopped, and I never heard from him again. My experience with Jake gave me pause, but it was the low point and otherwise positive part of my life. I decided to treat it as a learning experience and get back on the OkCupid horse and continue meeting people. But I never dipped below my 85th percentile again. 3 months later, I met up with Derek, a 99% match, and was immediately smitten. We had chemistry and so much to say to each other. We grabbed coffee, went for a long walk, and sat by the ocean, chatting for hours. It was a romantic cliche come to life. We talked about our families, our careers, our dreams, and the train wreck dates we'd had on OkCupid. I shared with him the story of the unemployable wannabe musician surfer who tried to shove his finger up my ass in an Old Town parking lot and then lost his shit when I wouldn't go on a second date with him. After I finished my story, Derek paused for a moment and then said, "That sounds a lot like my old coworker, Jake. I used to sell that guy weed. He's an asshole."